Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You know how we do it here? We dig deep into some truly fascinating cases. And today we're heading to suburban Texas, 1994. The murder of Farah Frada.
This one, it's a case that's as tragic as it is complex, you know.
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, Farah Frada had it all. Young mother of three, beautiful home. But behind that picture-perfect facade, there was a much darker reality brewing. A difficult divorce brewing, and she had even started voicing fears for her own safety.
Which is chilling when you think about how this story unfolds.
Right. Like, it's almost like she had a premonition, and tragically, those fears would become a horrifying reality. One November evening, Farah was coming home from getting her hair done. You know, just a normal day.
Just an ordinary routine.
Exactly. And as she pulled into her garage, neighbors witnessed something absolutely horrific. An assailant shot Farah twice in the head, right there in her own garage.
Such a brutal act. And it just makes you think, you know, even in seemingly safe places like our own homes, violence can erupt.
Absolutely. And of course, immediately suspicion fell on Bob Frada, Farah's estranged husband.
It's natural to look at the spouse first in these cases.
Right. But Bob, he had what seems like a rock-solid alibi. He was at church with their three young children when the murder took place.
The perfect alibi.
Right. But Farah's parents and her best friend, they weren't buying it.
They knew better.
They knew the marriage was troubled, the custody battle was getting increasingly bitter, and they knew about Farah's growing fear for her safety.
It's often those closest to the victim who sense something is wrong. That intuition can be so valuable for investigators.
Yeah, their insights into the relationships, the tensions, it's all part of the puzzle. And as the investigation went on, the evidence against Bob Frada started piling up. First, they found $1,000 in cash in his car on the very night of the murder.
That kind of unexplained cash, especially that amount, is always a red flag. Could be hush money, could be payment for a hitman.
And then there's Bob's reaction when the police asked him what he thought the punishment for murder should be. He said flat out, anyone who kills should go to jail forever. But when they asked him about someone who hires a hitman to kill their spouse, his response was way more calculated. He said, it depends on the circumstances.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a huge red flag.
It's like he was weighing the options in his head, right?
It's like he thought about it before. Like he considered the different scenarios. And it's so different from his initial response about murder. It's chilling.
And hold on, because it gets even crazier. The investigation uncovered witnesses, guys who knew Bob from the gym. And they remembered him casually, almost jokingly asking around about finding someone to kill Farah.
Like he was putting out feelers.
Yeah, exactly. Like testing the waters to see what kind of reaction he'd get.
Premeditation right there. He wasn't just passively thinking about it.
Yeah.
He was actively looking for a way to make it happen.
Yeah.
And that casual approach, it's unsettling.
And it sends shivers down your spine for sure. Remember those divorce papers Farah filed?
All right.
Well, she had actually detailed some of Bob Frada's disturbing and frankly embarrassing sexual requests in those documents, stuff that made her deeply uncomfortable.
Things she wanted to keep private.
Exactly. So not only was there the anger and betrayal from the divorce itself, but now you've got this layer of potential humiliation on Bob's part too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when you combine those feelings with the ongoing custody battle, it creates this really volatile mix.
It's like a powder keg waiting to explode.
Right. And it just adds to that potential motive.
And things get even darker when you consider what had happened a few months before the murder. Farah had reported a terrifying incident to the police.
What happened?
An intruder broke into her home, used a stun gun on her, threatened her life. And all of this happened while her children were in the house.
Oh, my God.
It's horrifying. It's like straight out of a nightmare.
And police, they suspected Bob was behind it, but they just couldn't prove it at the time.
But it definitely adds to that pattern of escalation.
It does. And then another piece of the puzzle fell into place.
Yeah.
Phone records. The digital trail.
Remember Bob's airtight alibi about being at church?
Yeah.
Well, turns out he made a whole bunch of calls from that church phone on the night of the murder, including several to a mysterious woman named Mary Gipp.
Okay, so now we've got a new player entering the scene.
And Mary Gipp just so happens to be Bob Frada's mistress.
Oh.
At first, she refused to cooperate with the police, kept her mouth shut tight, but the prosecutors, they weren't messing around.
No, they weren't.
They took her before a grand jury.
High stakes.
And faced with the possibility of being charged herself, Mary Gipp decided to spill the beans.
That's a classic tactic. Sometimes you have to apply pressure to get to the truth.
It worked. And her testimony, it blew the whole case wide open.
What did she say?
Mary Gipp revealed that Bob Frada had hired her live-in boyfriend Joseph Price Stash to arrange Farah's murder. Price then recruited a teenager named Howard Guidry to actually pull the trigger.
So a whole conspiracy.
Yeah, and according to Mary Gipp, Bob was at church with the kids when the murder happened while she was at home. Get this, watching figure skating on TV. Wow, I mean, the details she gave. It's like she laid out the whole plan.
She did. And get this, she even saw the murder weapon when Price came home that night.
Yeah.
And maybe it was guilt, maybe it was a moment of clarity, but she wrote down the gun's serial number.
That's incredible. That one detail could make or break the case.
It did. It directly linked Bob Frada to the murder weapon.
And corroborated Mary Gipp's story.
Exactly. And here's another twist. The police had actually already confiscated that same gun in an unrelated crime.
You're kidding.
Nope. The weapon used to kill Farah was sitting in their evidence locker the whole time.
Talk about a stroke of luck for the prosecution.
Right. It's like something out of a movie. So with Mary Gipp's testimony and the murder weapon tied to Bob Frada, the pieces were falling into place. 5 months after Farah's murder, Bob Frada was arrested and charged with capital murder.
And then the trial began.
The first trial was a whirlwind of emotions.
Yeah.
And the prosecution. They made the difficult decision to put Bob Frada's own son, Bradley, on the stand to testify against him. Oh, gosh. That's got to be tough, to have your own child testify against you.
Could you imagine the emotional toll on a child like that, to confront their own parent in such a public way?
Heartbreaking, but sometimes it's necessary to get to the truth.
And Bradley's testimony was powerful. He was only 7 years old at the time of the murder, but he vividly remembered his dad making a lot of phone calls from the church that night.
Corroborating Mary Gipp's account.
Exactly. It weakened Bob's alibi even further. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding Bob Frada guilty of capital murder. He was sentenced to death.
Wow, less than an hour. They must have been pretty convinced.
The evidence was strong. But here's the thing. Bob Frada's story doesn't end there. 13 years after his conviction, a federal judge threw out the verdict and ordered a new trial.
What? Why?
Legal technicalities. The judge ruled that the confessions of Price and Guidry, which they later recanted, shouldn't have been admitted as evidence in the first trial.
Oh, wow.
And get this, Mary Gipp's testimony. It was deemed inadmissible, too.
So now the prosecution is back to square one.
With way less evidence to work with.
This is going to be tough.
A retrial, a lot less evidence, and the Frada children, now teenagers, having to relive this whole nightmare all over again. Can you imagine the emotional toll? Knowing their father could actually walk free.
I can't even begin to fathom it.
And Farah's parents, they never gave up their fight for justice for their daughter. I mean, their strength through all of this is just remarkable.
It really is. Inspiring, even. It speaks to the power of love and the unwavering pursuit of justice.
It does. So, back to the retrial. With those key pieces of evidence gone, the defense team had to come up with a new strategy.
Had to shift gears.
For sure. They went after Mary Gipp's credibility, suggesting she could have had a motive to lie, maybe even planted the serial number on the gun herself.
Trying to discredit the star witness.
Yeah, and they downplayed those incriminating conversations Bob had at the gym. You know, the ones where he asked about finding someone to kill Farah? They said it was just harmless venting. A frustrated husband blowing off steam.
A common defense tactic when the evidence is weaker. Create doubt. Plant seeds of uncertainty in the jurors' minds.
And they even tried to explain away those phone calls Bob made from the church, suggesting maybe Price was blackmailing him after the murder.
So many alternative explanations.
But despite all that, those phone records, they still painted a pretty damning picture, you know? They showed a pattern of communication between Bob Frada and the people involved in the plot.
The connections were there.
And those gym buddies who testified, they described a much darker side to Bob Frada. It wasn't just venting about a divorce.
There was intent.
Plus, the motive was still there, the bitterness, the custody battle. It was a recipe for disaster.
So a toxic mix.
And then you add in those disturbing details Farah had included in her divorce papers about Bob's behavior.
It all starts to add up.
It does. And one of the most powerful moments in the retrial came when Amber Frada, Farah's daughter, took the stand to testify.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine the courage it took for her to face her own father in court and to speak about the devastating impact his actions had on her life?
Must have been incredibly difficult.
She talked about growing up without her mother, the pain of missing out on all those milestones, and the constant fear that her father might one day be free to hurt her and her brothers.
It's just heartbreaking.
And if that wasn't enough, the prosecution also played recordings of Bob Frada's phone calls from jail.
From jail?
Yeah. He was facing a possible death sentence, but there he was, flirting with women, making crude jokes, showing absolutely no remorse for what he had done.
That's unbelievable.
And to make it even worse, The jury heard him say that he actually believed in the death penalty. For other people, of course.
It's like he lacked any sense of self-awareness.
Right. It was shocking. So after a long and emotional trial, the jury found Bob Frada guilty of capital murder once again.
Wow.
However, this time they were deadlocked on the sentencing.
Really?
But justice wasn't going to be denied. After a second sentencing hearing with more powerful testimony from Amber Frada, the jury finally reached a verdict.
Death.
Back to death row. Bob Frada was sent back to death row where he remained until his execution in 2023.
More than 2 decades after he orchestrated his wife's murder.
It's a bittersweet victory. You know, justice was finally served, but it's a stark reminder of the irreversible consequences of Bob Frada's actions. Farah's life was tragically cut short, and her children will forever bear the scars of this tragedy.
This case really highlights the ripple effects of violent crime. How it impacts not just the victim, but everyone around them.
Absolutely. The Farra Frada murder case. It's a reminder that darkness can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives. And sometimes the people closest to us are capable of unthinkable acts.
It's a chilling thought. It makes you question everything and everyone.
It does. This case, with all its twists and turns, the deceit, the betrayal, it reminds us that the road to justice can be long and arduous.
And that sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.
It really is. So what are your thoughts on Mary Gipp's role in all of this? Do you see her as someone who betrayed Farah's trust, or as someone who ultimately helped bring her killer to justice?
That's the question, isn't it? It's complex. There are no easy answers.
There aren't the Farra Frada murder case. It's one that stays with you long after the final verdict. It leaves you with this lingering sense of unease and a reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can reside in the human heart.
It's a case that makes you think, makes you question, makes you appreciate the preciousness of life.
And that's what we do here on The Deep Dive. We explore these complex cases. We uncover the hidden truths, and we hope that in doing so, we can learn something from them. We can grow from them, and we can maybe even prevent something like this from happening again. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.